Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to the weekend review, which will be slightly different this week without any match action over the weekend. Hosted as always by myself, Sean, and joined as always by my faithful West Australian crew. We've got Anthony, Paul, and Tommy all joining us. Anthony, how's your week been without any Celtic?
Busy with work, Sean. My offside of my other pharmacist, he's been sick, so I've had to pull double shifts. So I've been busy. So I even worked Saturday, and then I had my goddaughter's second birthday yesterday, so we had a little birthday party for her. So that was really good. But that's been it. Obviously, try to keep a track of all the daily report on who the new favourite for being the next Celtic manager. Obviously, we're right into that in a minute, but try my best to keep on top of it all. But it's just been work, unfortunately.
All right, but there's no pandemic anymore, Anthony, so you can take some time off. Yeah.
Oh, I'm so sure about that. I'll talk about that later.
All right, Tommy, how's your week been?
Pretty similar to Anthony's, mate. I don't have a business to run. I'm just one of the employees in the workforce, but it's pretty chaotic at the moment in my world, and finance pretty busy. No Celtic at the weekend, which is a good thing and a bad thing. Good thing because I don't get all the stress and the anxiety that I generally get. But just obviously miss watching Celtic play. But pretty quiet weekend for me as well. Didn't play any football, carrying a bit of an injury at the moment, so which I need a scan on. But looking forward to getting into this chat about what may or may not be happening.
Right. And Paul, did you not get the memo about wearing a grey hoodie? What's going on?
I missed the memo. Obviously, I've not softened up as much as you lads in the time we've been here. I managed to get the shirt sleeves on.
I've got my hot drink in my
I've just got water tonight, and I thought Anthony's got a nice ride on the go. No hoodie or a nice. It's a weather for a nice dark porter or stout, but I had plenty Friday, Saturday, Sunday, so I should probably lay off it on a Monday. I had a 1-year-old's birthday on Saturday, and apparently free beer and margaritas as they go at these things, so I was mildly intoxicated by the time I came back from that. So thankfully there was no game to worry about on Saturday night, because I doubt I'd have seen it.
Oh, well, I guess there was that orgy of money.
I watched that the next day. It was turgid.
The BBC headline? Hold on, I've got it here. Let's just see. Get out of the way just now. BBC headline was "Written in the Stars." I thought it was more written in the oil-drenched sands of the Middle East. But what do we have any kind of romantic empathy towards Man City here, or is it just like, this is not what football should be about?
Me. Sorry, Paul. No romanticism about Man City, the club, and how they've got there. Definitely not, obviously. But I think, as I was saying to you, Sean, just before we come on air, I just really enjoy watching them play football. I think they play football the right way. Obviously, they've got a lot of amazing players, which helps, but they're just really good to watch. And Guardiola's a decent coach. I'm quite happy to see them do it. As I said, football's a beautiful game, and they play it the beautiful way, in my opinion. So regardless of how they got there.
Anthony, were you happy for the greeting Wayne Rodgers that scored the winning goal? The one that had a blub on the air after Scotland beat them?
Sheikh Mansour, that was his first Man City game in 10 years or something like that, going to watch the Champions League finals. So I think that says all you need to know about them and their supporters and everything they know about it. I mean, I totally did, but I missed, being perfectly honest. Just, it did not even enter my radar. So I've got no comment, to be honest. I just think that it just doesn't do it for me, basically.
But we did get a mention, Paul. Did you notice on the list of domestic treble winners? Did you see that?
I did notice that. I obviously didn't watch it live, as indicated in my opening comments, but I did decide to watch it back in full without knowing the result on Sunday morning. And look, I've got no love for City either, and the majority of those bloated clubs, particularly them, in the fact that the financial fair play stuff was they were on the verge of being kicked out of Europe, and then they rescinded all of that and they go on and win the tournament. So, but I agree with Tommy, they do play good football. but it was a bloody awful game. And the really one half decent bit of creation, nice pass in the channel, and the ball broke. And it's a really good finish by Rodri, to be honest. He's basically just passed it with power and bent it into the corner. But there wasn't a lot of quality in what should have been, well, is the showpiece of club football. So, yeah, it was 2 hours I wouldn't get back. So it was slightly, but yeah, I've not got a whole lot of interest either. I just thought, it's a spare couple hours, so I'd watch it and see if it lived up to the hype, which it sadly didn't.
Whenever like the kids at school or whatever are like, oh yeah, Man City fan, I'm like, you ever been in a game? How many players can you name? Like, I don't really give it that to them, but like they say to me, like, who do you support? And I go, Celtic, and they go, oh, but who's your big team? I'm like, just check your grade there. What was that? A B? I'll see now. But like I'd say, honestly, honest to goodness, like I actually prefer enjoy watching Scottish football. I would rather watch a Hearts Hibs game than I would have watched the Champions League game the other night. I think that it's just over refined to a point. Like I just enjoy like
sterile.
Like mistakes are entertaining, right? Like players playing badly and being able to criticize them is entertaining, whereas like just having to wait for someone to do something outstanding is just like boring at times. I don't know. That's what I think.
Scottish football's bonkers as well, which is it's always entertaining.
Right. Except how many times do you get like a guy in his 60s wearing a bonnet and a ball drops onto his head from the roof of the stand? Like that happened in Scottish football this season or last season, whatever it was. Dick Campbell.
Or you get somebody too near the effects mic, just giving it absolute pelters to the opposition, like when they're doing the
Crocker has to apologise every match.
That guy at St Mirren that day, far out. Like, I thought he was going to have a stroke. He just like was running the whole half. It was funny.
Yeah, it was hilarious.
Even stuff like the Dunfermline mascot had like a bucket out with like collecting funds for Falkirk to finish their stadium when they were playing them. Like it's total banter. Like in English football is just a tourist league. All of these people, everything was a goal scored. Every second person's got their video phone out. It drives me nuts. I just don't enjoy it. I really don't enjoy it, to be honest. But yeah, anyway, I don't know. That wasn't even on the run sheet. That was just quite a tangent. But let's just go off it. Okay, so let's get back to the main event. Anthony, how are you feeling? It's 6 days since Ange left us in the lurch, arguably. How are you feeling now that emotions have calmed? How's your reflection now? More objective reflection.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, when we came on last week, it was highly suspected that Ange was ready to go, but officially hadn't left yet. So we were obviously speculating at that point. So obviously, this is our first sort of go at it, knowing what we know now. I've sort of, I was sort of pragmatic about the whole thing because, I mean, it's just the lure of the English Premier League, the money, the allure, the fact that in Australia, we build up the English Premier League for whatever reason as the top league. So, that's where you've got to test yourself. Obviously, a bit of stuff came out around Ange, potentially, maybe this plan had been in place for a little while and it wasn't all hatched in the last week or two, like we were led to believe. But ultimately, he delivered a treble. And he's left the squad in a relatively good position. So, you compare it to Rodgers, and obviously we're going to talk about Brendan Rodgers a fair bit tonight. To be a comparison between Rodgers and Ange, I never really bought into Brendan Rodgers. I always kind of thought Brendan Rodgers was always about Brendan Rodgers, and I didn't really feel like the wool was pulled over my eyes with Brendan. Whereas with Ange, I believed him. I thought he was going to be there for a project, and I honestly had in my heart thought he could be there for like 4 or 5 seasons. I really thought he was going to build a legacy. And then potentially challenge himself in English Premier League or maybe one of the main leagues in Europe, so the La Liga or Serie A. But I honestly thought he was trying to, like, because he's uprooted his family and brought them all the way across to Australia. From Japan over to Scotland. I really thought he might have put some roots down and really sort of had a real red hot go with Celtic. So I definitely believe I believe what Ange said. So that initial feeling is that punch in the gut. You feel betrayed. You feel a bit like, but if you don't feel that way, then you're sort of like, well, are you really a supporter? Are you really emotionally invested? And over the week I was like, well, I can understand why he's left, but I just kind of, it's always that longing of what could have been. He could have had our go at Champions League football. Like, what would that look like next season? What would the next evolution of Ange ball? Who would he brought? What players would he brought in? It's more like the what could have been, what ifs type scenarios. So yeah, for that's a bit disappointing. But now you turn your attention to like who the next candidate's going to be, who's ready to take Celtic forward next, and what's that going to look like, and what's their plan? What players are they going to keep? What players are going to be part of their plans, and then who they're going to bring in, and what changes they're going to make. So it's always tumultuous. It's always it's a bit gut wrenching, and obviously every day the Daily Records, they've got that daily KPI of trying to bring up a new name for the job every day. So you've got to sift through that rubbish as well. But I'm hoping. We'll come back to it, but I hope by the end of the week we've got a lot of clarity around who the next manager is going to be. But yeah, I said it last week. I said, Ange goes with my well wishes. Like, it is what it is. But like I said, he fooled me. Brendan didn't fool me, but that big Ange did. So it hurts a little bit, but I'm getting over it.
So I'd listened to the BBC thing about it. I think, Tommy, did you catch that as well? I can't remember if it was you I was talking to about it.
No, I don't think so. It wasn't me.
Tom English had came out and said that, he was basically saying, oh, it was all fair and well. But the one thing he said was, apart from name dropping and quoting Tommy Burns, when he already knew within himself that he was heading out the door like a couple of days later. So he said the word he used to describe that was crass. How did you feel? How do you feel now upon reflection about the way Ange spoke to his fans? Do you feel misled, or do you feel, do you agree with Tom English that it was just that one thing that was beyond the pale, or do you feel overall it was, a bit two-faced?
Myself?
Yeah, Tommy.
Sorry. Yeah, sorry. Look, the Tommy Burns thing, in retrospect, yes. Look, I don't think he should have said it. It's not something I'm particularly comfortable with. I mean, obviously, Tommy Burns is a legend of the club for a good reason. And to throw that in there when, by the looks of it, he's already he's out the door. Is a bit like, I think he should have chosen different words, but I'm very similar to Anthony. I thought Anthony summed it up very well. I just feel that we're being led down the garden path a little bit, because I really genuinely believed that we were so lucky that we just sort of felt as if we'd sort of stumbled across this guy that was just a perfect fit for our club in terms of, where he'd come from, his background, this guy that's trying to get to Europe for so long, and then we give him the opportunity. And I really thought that he would set down roots and give us another couple of years. But I think it's just another reflection and where we actually sit in European football, to be honest. And we're going to get these guys come in, and if we get them for 2 or 3 years, we're pretty lucky. I think Brendan Rodgers was similar. I mean, different case. We sort of knew that Brendan Rodgers was all about Brendan Rodgers right from the start, and he did leave us in the lurch in the middle of the season. But the thing for me is, at least Ange sort of got us to the end of the season. But the way he spoke and a lot of his words through the last couple of years sort of make you think that, hang on a minute, is he just another one of these guys, another one of these mercenaries? Which is sort of fair enough. You can understand it. He's 57 years old. He's set up his family from around the world. They're following him. He's got an opportunity to probably quadruple his income, set them up for life. He's always wanted to make a name for himself. He's making a name. So you can sort of understand it, but yeah, it does leave a bit of a sour taste. I mean, I think as recently as 2 or 3 months ago, he was saying to the media, you'll be surprised how long I'm going to be here, which sort of intimates that he's going to be here for a while. And then all in the background, he's got this going on. So a bit of a sour taste, but as I said, we'll move on, and it's just now about getting the right person.
And what you mentioned there was, things going on in the background, and what was leaked after he left was that he'd apparently turned down 3 approaches, or was at least 3, I think was the words used. Was it Leeds, West Ham, Brighton? And Paul, hopefully Southampton. Hopefully, you can give me some more details. I'm going to pass it to you just now. Andrew Galea saying at least Ange completed the season. So does he get some long-term credit, like once things have settled, once the dust is settled, for seeing it through? And what was essentially a tight season that couldn't have just had someone like Neil Lennon rock up and see out. Paul, do you give him some credit for that?
I give him a lot of credit for it, Sean, and I'm going to be a bit softer on Ange than the other guys. Obviously, you haven't sort of given your exact view yet, but I guess I'm probably going to be easier on him than the rest of us. I just, on the Tommy Burns stuff, I pull up Patrick McLaughlin's comment there, and I tend to agree with Patrick on this. I think people have got emotional about it. I think he was saying, players and managers come and go, but the fans are always there. And he's obviously used Tommy's quote to indicate that. Now, in the hindsight, people get emotional that he's gone, and he's taken Tommy Burns' name in vain. But I think it was done with the best of intentions. Whatever he is, he's an intelligent bloke, right? So he's not. I don't think he's used that. No, he knew he was going, right? He was, 95% sure he was going when he used that. So I don't think he's used that, in a spiteful or, particularly crass. You can say it's crass because of how people feel, but I genuinely think he was like, you're there and you're always there and you always will be, because that's the fans will always be there. That's effectively what the club is. Anyone who works the club or runs the club or works, manages the club or plays the club, basically custodians. But the fans are there for generations. So I don't treat him too harshly. I think I said last week that I don't think he thought this opportunity was coming as quick as it did. I thought we'd get 3 years out of him, and in an ideal world we might get 4. But I didn't really think we would probably get past 3 if he was successful in the Champions League. And I think he probably thought he would need a decent Champions League campaign to get offered a gig as big as Spurs. And, circumstances have conspired to offer him that opportunity before he had achieved probably what he wanted to or set out to do in the Champions League. So, I don't treat him too harshly on that. I'd have loved him to stay. I agree with the guys and pretty much every fan that he definitely, there's a lot of sort of disappointment at the what ifs. And I think if he was backed again in the transfer market, which there's no reason to suspect he wouldn't have been, then, he would have tweaked the squad and given us a real good tilt at a Champions League opportunity. But, that said, looking at the pots that could potentially come out, we're likely to be in pot 4. There's a lot of really hard draws. There's a lot
close to 100% chance.
Yeah, there's a lot of really hard draws out of there. So, whenever that comes, we'll need to be pretty lucky to get a reasonable draw, but probably due one. I just think it's too good an opportunity for him to go. I don't think it's Spurs, and I don't think Spurs are a bigger club than us. I think they play in a bigger, richer, more elite league, and he's ambitious. And therefore, if we're in that league or an equivalent league, he doesn't go, is my view. But we aren't, and it came up and he went. And as we said, he's at the age he is, he might not get an opportunity at that level again. It's a gamble for him, so he wasn't going to let that go by.
Yeah, I'm pretty aligned with your views there, Paul. And in terms of Champions League, there's about 300 possible draws you can get. So and we're almost 100% in the bottom pot, which is looking like a strong, pretty equivalent to the third pot in terms of, obviously we need to see the qualifiers first. But yeah, what we're going to jump into, we'll move over to our speculating on. Well, not speculating, but we're going to reflect on the names that have been floated. So I'll just bring up on screen for anyone that's watching on YouTube the manager odds as of this morning. So we'll focus a bit on the two favourites there, Enzo Maresca and Brendan Rodgers. But just before we do, there's a couple that I wanted to highlight. Particular Jindrich Tripovsky. Paul, was it you that brought this story up?
It was me that brought this story up.
Can you fill the listeners in on what happened there?
Yeah, so for anyone that's heavily involved in Twitter and Celtic Twitter, there's a guy that posts under the name Kev Murray, who's been missing in action for quite some time, but he's basically the champion of the wind-up. He's been responsible for all sorts of stuff down the years, but he's come back with a blast in the last week or so since this all broke, and he managed to, just for his own amusement and because of the amount of ridiculous speculation there is, he decided he was going to find a candidate, flag it up as, being somebody in the know, that this guy was, definitely on Celtic's radar, and he managed to get that then picked up by, I think the guy's, I think he's Czech, and I think a Czech or Slovakian online outlet picked up the story that he was being interviewed for the Celtic job, and then he managed to get it, and then quickly from there it gathered pace at other, Daily Record probably picked up on it, a few others, and then he got him up onto the betting, and I think he was, so on that list he was 14 or 16 to 1, which is
18 to 1. So
yeah,
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7th in the list.
So just behind Knutson, which is, we all, like, loads of people want Knutson, and this guy has managed to get him up on the list. Above some candidates I would say are actually more genuinely considered.
Pascal Janssen, for example. Yeah.
Well, yeah. And even Muscat, we didn't touch on Muscat much last week, but I think there's more validity in him than a lot of people on that list, if I'm honest.
Despite so that are
connections.
Just while we're on the subject, Des Buckingham, who is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th on that list, whose managerial credentials include Mumbai City and 14 games at Wellington Phoenix in 2017. Is 5th on the list because he flew into Glasgow Airport for a stag do, and some bookies are offering him at 6 to 1. So that's kind of where we're at. We're the 5th and 7th.
At least he's drifted. He's drifted a bit in the last little while.
I think he was much shorter at one point, but like this 5th and 7th in the list are purely social media driven. And let's just look at 4th in the list there, Stephen Bradley. Does anyone know who Stephen Bradley is? I had to look it up.
I think he's a Shamrock Rovers manager, is he not?
He is. Yeah. He's the Shamrock Rovers manager. 38 years old. He's won 3 in a row titles with Shamrock Rovers in Ireland. Hadn't even heard of him until I saw him. He was 4th on the list. So 3 of the top 7 candidates, 2 are fabricated in social media, and the third one is probably just because of people in Ireland sticking a few punts on it, if that's what they still use.
And the Dermot Desmond connection. It's just probably a bit of hopefully a lazy connection there.
Well, yeah. So either way, let's delve into the ones that may or may not be more realistic and serious candidates. So the story from Stephen McGowan, is that his first name, in the Mail, was that it's Brendan Rodgers, who's normally, the reason why we name drop him is he's normally a very reliable source, has it as Brendan Rodgers' first refusal on the job, as in it's your job if you want it, and they're having face-to-face meetings now about that. Don't know if it's got legs or not, but Anthony, you kind of touched a little bit on Brendan Rodgers earlier. How do you feel objectively about that appointment if it happens?
I think of all the candidates you've got on that list there, Sean, he's probably A, the most realistic, and B, the safest, because he's the only one on that list with experienced coaching in Scotland, I think. We need to look list again, but so he's been at Celtic before. He's bossed the Scottish Premier League the last time he was there. He's available. And he's looking for, obviously, for a bit of rehabilitation after things went a bit pear-shaped at Leicester. Would I take him back? Yeah. I mean, I think there was a poll on 20 Minute Tim's. There was about 71% of Celtic fans. It was like 20,000 people voted. 70% or 71% said yes, they would take him back. And I think there will be a hardened element of the supporter base that will never forgive him for leaving mid-season. But I think the vast majority will get behind him because if he becomes the next Celtic manager, you get behind the manager regardless to a certain extent. But out of that list, he's, for me, definitely, we're at Champions League football up for grabs again for the team that wins the league next season. We've managed it the last 2 seasons. There's no guarantee that the Huns will get into the Champions League this season. They've still already played some qualifiers. So if they don't make it this season, winning the league is imperative because that just completely, you're just sucking the life out of them completely if we manage to make it again another year and they don't. So I take the safe pair of hands and he's it. And there's criticisms of Brendan Rodgers, and we'll touch on those. But I think, like I said, compared to that list, realistically, it seems he's Celtic's preferred candidate because they've sent Michael Nicholson and the other guy, I can't remember his name, is it Rodgers? The two of them have gone over to Mallorca. So, they've obviously presented Dermot's offer and said, it's yours if you want it. So, ball's in Brendan's court. But, I'd take him back. As much as, like I said, he did the dirty. But I think after what's happened with Ange, I think this time around, everyone's going to be, well, all right, it might not be forever, but if he wins us another league in the meantime, then, great.
So, obviously, the concern is that, so Andrew Galea is saying here, he's available until the first EPL management casualty. Michael Ross, Rodgers is a liar. Ask Danny McGrain. But then Andrew McGuigan's saying the opposite, has to be Rodgers. So if you look at his CV, and Mahesh has touched on it as well, he's got 8 months at Watford, 6 months at Reading. I believe he was either sacked or shown the door at both of those jobs. He then had 2 years at Swansea, 3 years at Liverpool, just shy of 3 years at Celtic, and 4 years at Leicester. So if you're reading his CV, there's actually a track record of loyalty, and I think the stat that came out was he was the longest serving Celtic manager in the last decade, something like that. Tommy, how do those opposing factors weigh up to you? That there's a perception he's a liar and wants to punch his ticket, or that he actually appears to have loyalty to the teams he is at?
I'm not sure if it's talking about loyalty or anything. I think, as I touched on earlier with Ange, what that's shown me is that a lot of these guys, at the end of the day, they're driven by their own careers, which is fair enough. That's what most people are. And on reflection now, what's happened with Ange after a couple of years, even though he didn't leave us in mid-season, what happened with Rodgers, you can sort of for me anyway, I can sort of understand that a little bit better. And the key with Rodgers is, if you look at where he's been, for me, it's generally his first year and his second year is generally gets the most out of the teams. He's good at walking into a dressing room with an established team, good culture, those sort of things, good team that's set up. So Celtic might be the ideal opportunity for him at this stage. In terms of how the fans will be received him, well then, there's obviously going to be people that are still going to have their noses out of joint. Up until probably last week, I would probably be one of them. But when I look at that list, in terms of coaching ability and gravitas and experience, for me, he's a standout. There's only one other person on that list that I would probably have before him. So for me, he's probably a safe pair of hands. He's walking in a good dressing room. But again, it's going to be, I think we just need to get used to this idea that, if a manager does well at Celtic, that we're only going to have them for a 2 or 3 year span. As soon as a better opportunity comes up in a bigger league, that's what they're going to want to do. They want to test themselves again at a higher level. So I think that's something we need to get used to. And for me, it's all about finding the right guy at this time and putting him into a good dressing room, a good squad of players, trying to get the best out of them for the next year, 2 years, and then, from there, whatever happens, happens. So for me, I would take him back out of the names in those lists, aside from one.
Who was the other name?
Graham Potter.
Graham Potter, yeah. I think, but we can talk a bit more about that after. But I know, Paul, we talked in our group chat about, we'd both read a thread, which was a very good analysis. Something Forrest was the chap's name on Twitter
Forrest finishing, yeah.
Yeah, about how Rodgers was in his kind of time, final times. And maybe you can mention as well, touch on Michael Ross's comment here about Rodgers embarrassed us in Europe. Not sure I wholly agree with that, but maybe you can cover those topics, Paul.
Yeah, so look, I'm a bit on the fence about this, to be honest, because I picked up on that thread and I thought it was a good counterpoint to it. I think there's been a big shift in the last week. Ange leaving sort of abruptly or surprisingly, as it probably was, seems to have rapidly softened the support's view on Rodgers coming back. I think mainly because they have realised that romanticism is probably not there, and so maybe with the experience and success that Rodgers had, and the fact that he's coming to the fore as a potential leading candidate. People start to work back towards that. But yeah, the thread by Forrest finishing on Twitter was essentially a counterpoint to the positivity around Rodgers, and so, basically suggesting that he isn't a builder, which Ange is. He was very much about Rodgers, and he didn't manage his assets well. His signings weren't great after the first year, and generally he didn't leave us. Obviously, the midnight flip mid-season doesn't show well on him, particularly when he took the guts, the backroom staff with him as well. But beyond that, he didn't really leave us in a better position than he sort of found us. We had an uptick through that swing and then a downtick. No, and to be honest, there's a lot of truth in that thread, but I would say, like anything, there's nuance and shades of grey in amongst the black and white. There's a lot of people saying, and there's points have been made already that he's the safest pair of hands on the list, and I guess just from past experience, that's true in terms of, his results and his history. The points that people make about the fact that, wave an EPL job in front of him and he could be back out the door. You take that and once bitten, twice shy, but you assume that in this process, if he is, going to be offered the job, there's some assurances at boardroom level that he would at least see out a season, if it was even only one. But I get the stress over it because people think that once bitten, twice shy. Like I say, look, the things I would say about Rodgers is whatever he is, whatever you say about his transfer dealings, and I've got some sympathy with his transfer dealings if you believe the stuff. Well, the Leicester stuff, it seems to be a documented fact, and certainly at Celtic, it seems like funding was pulled in his final year, which is why we ended up with loans and the like. So you can argue whether he was promised funding and then it disappeared, or they got wind he was looking for another job elsewhere and decided to pull the funding and save it back for the next manager. But either way, he definitely wasn't supported at the level that he had been earlier in his tenure at Celtic. And then at Leicester, pretty much the money got pulled prior to this season and even the season before. It's been on a downward spiral. So I actually think the job he did at Leicester, he punched them above their weight. He got 2 top 5 finishes and probably should have got top 4 and therefore Champions League, which, albeit they had one breakout season where they won the title, but that was a bit of a freak. I think to get them 2 fifth finishes back to back and win an FA Cup shows a pretty good standard with what he had. He then had players sold out from under him and didn't really get the funding to replace those players. And he was on a bit of a downward spiral from there. So the one thing about Rodgers we know, aside from, we can, you can argue the toss about his transfer dealings, but he's a brilliant coach. He makes players that he's already got in the dressing room better. We saw that at Celtic. We've seen it at other clubs. And if you look at this, look at a young squad that we've got. We spoke about a lot in the last few weeks about players that aren't quite where we want them to be. I think players like Bernabei, Kobayashi, even somebody like Abada, who I think has got an incredibly high ceiling, has got a lot of room to play at a higher level. And one of the ways that happens is through great coaching. So I agree with the guys that from a coaching point of view, he's the standout on that list of what we know in terms of experience. We'll get to Maresca in a minute, but he's a bit of an unknown quantity, and he could be amazing, but we really don't know much about him, and certainly that would seem to be more of a gamble.
All right, Paul, don't steal my link. Come on.
I've definitely softened on Rodgers. But we go back to the points that last week that Anthony made, and I think I backed him up on this. Is it's not a very imaginative appointment. It would be, for me, it would be a 1 to 2 year project. Well, not a project, 1 to 2 years of developing the squad we've got, buying a few other people, throwing a decent budget and good quality players at this, and trying to grind Rangers into the dust in the next 2 years and set it up for somebody else to come in and maybe be there for another 2 or 3 years and take us on to the next level. That's my view.
So on that Twitter thread that you were talking about, the piece of evidence that stood out to me about not building for the long term was that, in his final year, he signed Masonda, Weah, and Ollie Burke, all like expensive, high profile loan players. And under Postecoglou, every loan player we've signed has been either converted or with a buy option, with a realistic view to buy option in those. So it's felt more like a squad building. But Andrew Galea and Mahesh have both made the point that when Rodgers was last here, Sevco were effectively dog meat. So, there's that. Maybe not.
You can only beat what's in front of you.
Yeah, but point being,
and we absolutely smashed them. So
yeah,
the rest of the league was probably stronger back then as well. Like,
and he's inheriting a better squad this time around as well. I'd say,
and he's gonna have a ton of money to spend as well.
The thing with the signings, sorry, Sean. The thing with the signings is we particularly in these last year, we talk about these loan signings, and I think maybe Paul touched on it before. Is like we don't know how much influence he had over the signings. He had that guy Lee Congerton as well, and with Lawwell in the CEO role, and I think it's a pretty well-known sort of fact that or rumour that Lawwell seemed to have a lot of a say in the signings and the players we were signing. So we don't know how much that impacted his last year. So if moving on now, we're several years down the track. I think the key thing is, do we have the right structures in place so that people that mark Lawwell are looking at players and saying, these are a list of players we've got for this position, these are players we've got for this position, and looking at these sort of things so that then he can make the decision. Because I think, as someone in the comments might have said, like, he was after people like Castagna, and there was another fullback from Valencia that I remember he was interested in that he didn't get. So I don't think you can blame that all on Rodgers, although that does make me hesitant about him. But I think it's something that remains to be seen. But you need to remember the impact that Rodgers made on some of the players and the squad when he came in. Guys like Scott Brown, who was finished, James Forrest, who was finished. Callum McGregor went to a new level under him. So, you just don't know. Armstrong, exactly. So, I mean, there's a number of players there. So it's like anything. There's pros and cons for everything. And who knows? But, yeah, I mean, for me, that, as I said, on that list, there's only one I'd have ahead of him.
Just before we move on to the next candidate, Dougie Lynch makes a really good point again, and we touched on director of football last week. But if we are going to be changing managers every 2 years, we do need a director of football that keeps that continuity, that is more in charge of the signing policy. Managers can obviously put their tuppence worth in, but one of the complaints I think on that thread, again from Forrest finishing about Rodgers, was he didn't manage assets very well. Like Nicham, we had that 15-17 million pound offer from Porto, and in the end we paid out his contract and let him go. It's just ridiculous. So, like, in terms of managing assets, that we didn't do that well. And if you've got a director of football whose job is to run the squad, I think some of those problems go away. We're in a position now where we've got a great young squad on long contracts. We need to make sure that's well managed over the next 2 to 3 years.
Yep. And you guys, I think you've all touched on it. We are in a much stronger position. Well, we're in a stronger position than when Brendan Rodgers left. But if you can imagine Rodgers coming in and do what Ange did with the shambles that we were in 2 years ago, that seems a lot less likely. And I wouldn't think Rodgers' name would even be mentioned. I mean, it wasn't 2 years ago, but even if he'd been out of work, it wouldn't have been mentioned, So JJI has made the point here that Bet365 have suspended betting on Brendan Rodgers in the last hour. Now, if I'm remembering correctly, that's the second time that betting has been suspended on a candidate, and the other one that was suspended is possibly is it third? There you go. So the other one that it was suspended on most recently, I believe, was Enzo Maresca, who remains odds on with the bookies to take over. I'm going to just open this up to anyone that wants to chip in on it, because I am deeply concerned about Enzo Maresca being appointed as our manager, and I'll explain why. So his managerial CV as a manager was he had 14 games at Parma in Serie B, so not even in Serie A, and in 14 games he had 4 wins and 4 draws, and so then he got sacked from Parma after 14 games and ended up back at Man City. Now, the logic is this guy works with Pep Guardiola. surely he can come and bring that Guardiola magic with him. Well, my counterpoint to that is how many assistant managers did Alex Ferguson go through, and how many of them were successful in their own right? I can't name one. Carlos Queiroz maybe had a good international career. Somebody tell me another assistant to Alex Ferguson that had a good career. Or Mourinho. Give me one. Well, I guess Rodgers was an assistant, or a coach with Mourinho. But like, apart from that, right? Like, being an assistant under a top manager does not translate. And it's another reason why I'm concerned about John Kennedy as much as I love John Kennedy to stay. Just working under top managers does not a good manager make. Tommy?
Yeah, totally agree, mate. And it really does concern me, because Celtic's not the job that you give to a guy that's a great coach, because not a great, as you just said, Sean, not a great, you can be the best coach in the world, but if you don't know how to manage, you're going to get nowhere. And the problem is, if he comes into Celtic, club that Celtic, loses his first couple of games, he's in trouble. You know, with no experience, with a record like he had at Parma. I think it was 6 wins in 14 games or something. I don't know the circumstances of why.
4 wins. 4 wins out of 14. In Serie B, not even in the top 4.
Serie B, yeah. So, I mean, it didn't last long. I mean, it is Italy, so, I mean, they're pretty temperamental over there. But
they're not much better in Scotland, Tommy.
I was going to say, chucking fences at buses here, you know.
So, but as I said though, like, he's not going to get the time in Scotland to settle. You know, like, if he's at least Ange, like when Ange came, not many people had heard about them, but then they maybe were able to do some research and they say, okay, well, this guy's got a track record. He's taken us through to the Asian Cup. He's taken us through the World Cups. He's won this title here. He's won the title in Japan. All those things. He's getting nothing to fall back on. If he doesn't start well, he's in trouble. And just think of him walking into the dressing room as well. Like, can a guy like that with no experience really grab hold of the dressing room? Maybe that was part of the problem at Parma. But for me, it's a very strong no for him, because I just think it's too risky an appointment for Celtic to take at the moment. I think we need someone that's been there and done it at least a little bit.
I'm going to throw some counterpoints just as devil's advocate.
Yep.
And I'm not saying
hang on. Well, before you do that, I want to agree with Tommy, because well, 2 examples, right? So you've got Sean Maloney, who came into Hibs. He was highly touted, really well respected, worked under Roberto Martinez at Belgium for years, blah, blah, blah. And how did that go? Not well. How did Steven Gerrard go at Rangers for his first couple of seasons as a rookie manager? Did he win any trophies? No. Did he make a lot of mistakes? Yeah. Did he throw his players under the bus? Absolutely. So I agree with Tommy. Celtic job is not the first. It's not your first job as a full-time manager.
John
as
Barnes.
much as you might be, if you're the wonder kid of assistant coaching, it does not necessarily make you a first-team manager. That and the fact that he does no press, like there's virtually no videos of him speaking at all anywhere. So that immediately gets the support a bit suspicious. Like, well, what's this guy actually like? Like, you know, what's his bag? And you know, and I'm not being racist, but the potential could be a language barrier issue there to a certain extent as well. And with the Scottish media, the fear, to be honest, I really don't think that he's the right candidate at this point in time. With Rangers, sort of like I said, if they don't make it in the Champions League this season, then if we win the league again this season, then that really, really, really just puts us in such a dominant position for the next foreseeable future. So for me, it's going to be someone who can get us another league title and take us forward from there. I don't think it's Enzo.
Paul, I'll let you make your counterpoints, but I'm just going to bring up a couple of comments first. Thanks to Shane for pointing out that Steve Clark was assistant to Mourinho, so a semi-successful manager there. Had some good success at Kilmarnock, and Rodgers was under Steve Clark at the time. Hi, Shane. Mark McDonald pointing out Arteta was Pep's assistant, took a while but doing well with Arsenal. I think that can actually speaks to your point, Anthony, that it takes time. Even if you do have that grounding under a good manager, that apprenticeship, even when you do go into the big job, it still does take time. And Mahesh making a good point here. Isn't Pep acting as an advisor to Dermot D? So this Nepo baby stuff from Citigroup worked for us under Ange, but I'm not as confident Lightning is going to strike twice there. Paul, would you like to make your counterpoint?
Yeah, so I'll preface this by saying I don't think he's the right candidate for the job, but in the act of some balance, I will provide some additional commentary and context. So the Parma stuff, by all accounts, Parma was an absolute basket case when he walked in, and a bigger basket case during it and when he walked out, through no fault of him. He had 14 players sold from under him in that first half season, and the Parma fans generally think, send him on with his, good grace. I don't think they think there was nothing he could do, essentially, in that. So all I'm going to say to that is he's had a shitty period, and if anything, it's probably built some resilience. I also think it's interesting that he was City's under-23 coach before going to Parma, but by the time he comes back, he's Pep's right-hand man. So he's gone away, come back pretty quickly, and been promoted. So there's obviously
Is he Pep's only right-hand man though, or does he have a couple of right-hand men?
He's got a few, but I think he's got a big team, but I think he's sort of he's next in line. I think. He's the right, and there's a left, and maybe a behind as well. I don't know. On Pep's boot room, I would say, look, yes, it's potentially taking time, but there's Vincent Kompany came out of there. So Vincent Kompany spent time in the backroom team, and then obviously went to Anderlecht to cut his teeth, and then done a great job at Burnley and got them up and promoted. We've spoken about Arteta already, who was originally touted for the job at Arsenal, I think in 2017 or 2018, and knocked it back and stayed on another year or two, and then he went in 19. And obviously it's a pretty competitive league, but he's done a good job at Arsenal. Tenkat has been part of his squads and his backroom staff in the past. I think he looked after the under-23s at Bayern when he was there. So, and he had some management before that. But I think, look, to say that there's absolutely no chance of him having success, I think is probably a bit unfair. Is it a risk? Is it a bigger risk than some of the other people on the list? 100%. Is he my choice? Absolutely not. But you would assume that if he is given the job, there's been something very impressive happened, or we are basically just Citigroup by an extension. So I don't think it's the latter. I don't think he will get the job. But I don't think he's as bad a candidate as certain sections of the media and our support are suggesting, but he's far from the candidate that I think we should be appointing at this time. He's possibly the type of candidate you might put in once we've ground Rangers into the dust in the next 2 years and set ourselves up even further. And maybe he's gone off somewhere and cut his teeth for a bit longer. And if he's, done a half decent job at that, maybe he gets a crack at that point. But yeah, I just wanted to sort of provide a little bit more context and a little bit of counterpoint to just having the same opinion as everyone else. I still think we should hire him.
Sorry, Paul. They're all good points, mate. And you obviously know more about the guy than me. But the one thing and the key thing for me is, like, if you look at people like Arteta, I'm not sure how Ten Hag done at Ajax, how long it took him to get going. Is the key thing for me is he's probably just not going to get the time at Celtic because you're expected to win every week. So that's probably the biggest difference for me. And if you had time to sort of bed in and sort of build things his way, maybe. But that's the thing that probably worries me the most, is if we went for him, is he's not going to get the time that he might need.
Yeah, so I'm assuming that he's a type of continuity candidate that would be playing almost identical football to how Ange has had us playing. So therefore, from a squad point of view, there's not much change required, and therefore there's a thought that potentially if he was hired, he would hit the ground running. I agree with you. It's too big a risk for my liking. But he's obviously a more live candidate than some of the nonsense that's on that list. I guess that's why it's worthy of exploring it and being a little bit more detailed on him than some of the people on that list.
Nah, let's mix it up. Let's get Sam Allardyce in, lump it long to the goal, and we'll just have Maeda scrambling around him like Aussie rules, playing for the crumb. That's the way to do it, guys. I think that's
we've obviously got we're an Aussie based show, so we've obviously got a couple of Aussies like pushing Muscat's case. And look, I'm not I'm not going to say Muscat's the number one candidate, but he makes more sense than a lot of people that have been touted for the job.
Yeah, like Yokohama, he's won the league with Yokohama. I can't say it. With the team
Yokohama
that Ange used to manage, and they were playing in a friendly. Tommy, actually, Tommy, I want to hear your take. Sellers Graham Potter, go for it.
Well, I just like the sound of what he's done in his history. I sort of read up a bit. I was listening to the E-Tim's podcast last week, and they were talking about when he went to Brighton, and someone was interviewing this is before he went to Chelsea, I think. I'm not sure, it might have been around that time. And they were interviewing the CEO, and they just said that so Paul Barber, I think is his name, is the Brighton CEO, and he said, look, Graham Potter, hands down, was the most impressive guy he's ever met in an interview process in his career, something along those lines. I might be mixing that up a little bit, but it was along those lines. Just his level of detail and his level of understanding in terms of Brighton, the club, in terms of the way he wanted to play. And then I looked a little bit more into him, and he actually started at a team called Leeds Carnegie or something. I don't even know. It's a team in England called in the Northern Counties East League. So I don't know what tier that is, whether that's 14, 15. And then he goes to Sweden, takes over Östersund, which is a Swedish fourth tier team. Takes them all the way to the top league in Sweden, wins the cup, takes them into the Europa League, ends up beating Arsenal at the Emirates as well. They didn't qualify from the group stage. And obviously then moves on. I think he was at Swansea for a short time before he get picked up from Brighton. Done a great job at Brighton, got them to the highest place finish up until De Zerbi this year. I think they finished 9th last year. And for me, he just sort of fits the identity of the way that we're playing. He sort of plays a similar 4-3-3, but then he could adjust it. I got this off Wikipedia, and this is from none other than the King of Kings. And he said that he watched the game with Graham Potter coaching Östersund, which is the Swedish team that he managed. And he said they played all kinds of different systems. They started off a match one way, changed it halfway through the game, changed the system, and then they changed it again. And he said that every player, regardless of the fact that they changed the system 3 times, knew exactly where they needed to be on the pitch, exactly what they needed to do. And I just think, look, for me, he's a fresh set of eyes. He's obviously very detailed in his approach. And I just think he went into the wrong club at the wrong time with Chelsea. I just think with all those hundreds of millions he spent trying to bring all those players together and build an effective team was always going to be difficult. And going back to time, didn't get the time really. So for me, I just think out of all the candidates, aside from Brendan, we talk about experience, those sort of things. To me, he's the one that sort of jumps off the page.
Yeah, and my only weigh in on what you're saying there is that it kind of sounds like what you're describing is more of a project manager, and it seems like that was his downfall at Chelsea, was that he was promised time to build this project and not given it in the end. And then obviously Lampard comes in and just sets fire to it. It was hilarious. I don't normally pay attention to English football, but that was hilarious. Anthony, pick one from the list, please, and sell me who that you think it should be, other than Rodgers.
Well, Daniel Farke. I mean, there's a headline in itself. He
off.
Yeah, I know. So he sort of got a mention with the Daily Record. I think what was it, Thursday last week? Oh, it was one of the days last week anyway. So Celtic maybe spoke to him. It looks like more than likely he's probably going to end up at Leeds. But he plays that German style, the press, the Jürgen press style football. Successful with Norwich, 2 stints with Norwich, getting them promoted from the Championship into the Premier League. Has the envious record of going 15 games defeated in the Premier League. Then he wins a game and then he gets sacked from Norwich. And I mean, if you sort of squint your eyes and cover his hair, he actually looks a bit like Big Ange as well. So he's got that going for him maybe as well. But is he a realistic candidate? I mean, he's available, but I think the most recent sort of speculation is that he could end up being the next Leeds boss, because obviously they want to come straight back up, and he's got pedigree in that league. He didn't do so great at Mönchengladbach last season. He finished 10th. Beat Bayern Munich, and he beat Bayer Leverkusen, I think. So he beat the top teams, but they finished 10th and he got sacked. So he's on the list, but again, I think it's more on the list the fact that he's available than probably anything else.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of that candidate as well, and he's got a good experience in the gung ho style of football, as I believe how it was described, which was kind of his success, where his success in the Championship came from, and where his failure in the Premier League came from was that he didn't quite have that pragmatism for the next step up. Mahesh just is kicking off in the comments about Kevin Muscat. So Mahesh saying Kevin Muscat could start a riot in a cemetery if his playing career is any guide. He's probably mellowed to Tony Soprano levels these days. Having watched Perth Glory down many years, I can confirm that Kevin Muscat is not a mellow manager. Maybe since he's went to Japan, maybe he's calmed down. I don't know, but he's certainly not in my recent experience. So what we'll do before we wind up with our I'm going to ask everyone for a name, and I'll ask the commenters as well. But before we do, Paul,
we should probably just quickly touch on Knutson, because I guess he's the other candidate that people were sort of singing out for in the comment section. So, Paul, do you want to have a quick burrow?
Yeah, look, I think Knutson's a good candidate. He's another potential continuity candidate in that, he plays a very similar style to how we've played. And look, his Bodo team played us off the park twice. So, it's a real snapshot for us on that. And, the counterpoint argument would be, well, he's done that for, he's been there for a few years and nobody else has taken a gamble on him. But let's be honest, bigger leagues don't take the gamble, smaller leagues take the gamble. So he was on Ajax's radar. Apparently that's not going to happen. He was on record originally, apparently, as, and maybe lost in translation, that he was definitely staying. That later was then changed to, well, maybe not if the offer's good enough and Bodo let him speak to him. And then there was some commentary that, 2 million quid was his buyout, and that would get us, or get anyone a chat with him and the opportunity to speak to him. Look, he's, I think, of the non-huge names, he's the next best candidate. I agree with Tommy, actually. I think the best candidate that's even listed is Potter, but I don't think that he's on there because he's out of work and he potentially needs some rehabilitation. I don't think he's coming to us. I think he's waiting for the first round of merry-go-round in the Premier League next season, and he'll pick up a job pretty quickly there, because whilst he might need a little bit of I think most people realise that Chelsea was an absolute basket case and he wasn't allowed to do what he would do there, and he'll get another good job in the Premier League without
I think he's also on gardening leave at the moment as well, so I think his compensation would be difficult for us to maybe manage that as well, potentially.
Well, yeah, he'd want to have to really come, because he's, the gardening leave would get stopped if he's got another gig. So I don't think he's, unfortunately, I don't think he's a live candidate. But I do think but if outside of him and Rodgers, I think Knutson's the next best. But it's looking pretty much one directional at the minute.
Yeah. Knutson, to me, CV not impressive, even if he did dismantle us in Europa League, and it seems that that's what this is all based on, because he's done well at Bodo Glimt since 2018, and he's now 54. So prior to the age of 50, CV is absolutely nothing going on there. Second tier team for a couple of years in Norway. It's a non-league team for a year before that, and he's just came out of nowhere at the age of 50. And done amazingly with Bodo Glimt, so I'm highly suspicious of that personally. But you're right, he did play good football against us, and he is sought after by at least one or two teams. So it's interesting. Paul, you had some interesting news and update for us, which is not been publicly broadcast widely yet. Would you like to talk us through what's going on here, and I'll pull the picture up?
Yeah, so before, save the picture for a second. Oh, yeah, okay, picture's up.
Right, yeah.
Save the picture for a second. So basically, this news broke last week in the local press in the northeast of Scotland. My hometown of Fraserburgh has previous history with Celtic. So in 1970, 8 days before we played Feyenoord and Milan in the European Cup final, which we unfortunately didn't go on to win, Celtic came up to Fraserburgh in the far northeast of Scotland to play a benefit match to support families of a local lifeboat that went down in sea in January of that year, and lost the majority of the crew. I think one crewman was thrown into the ocean or into the sea, and he survived, but everyone else passed away, sadly. There was a guy in the local town who actually happened to be mates with Jock Stein, and called up Jock Stein and said, any chance you can bring Celtic up to support these families? Jock, being Jock, wanted to help, and it just so happened there was a bit of a fallow period between the end of the Scottish season and the European Cup final, so we needed some games to keep the squad active. So he took the team up there, and basically this fixture. So when you stick the photo up now, so this is at Fraserburgh Golf Club. I imagine the day of the game or day before the game, and you can see 3 of the Lisbon Lions in that photo, and my old man right in the middle of the photo, over Bertie Old's right shoulder. So yeah, this is what cemented my dad's love of Celtic. He was already a Celtic fan by this point, bizarrely, coming from where he did, but this just sort of put the tin lid on it. So obviously 20 odd kids in that photo. For those of you listening on Spotify, you won't see the photo, but Billy McNeil, Bertie Auld, and I think that's John Clark up the back. And yeah, a bunch of kids in awe of these guys just chilling out 8 days, 7, 8, 9 days before a European Cup final. Obviously, they'd won one by this point, so they're probably a bit more relaxed, and potentially a bit more relaxed than they should have been. But yeah, so essentially this game was 1970. The 50-year anniversary was in 2020, and Celtic got back in touch with Fraserburgh FC and offered to play another match to support the lifeboat, because it's crucial to those local communities up there. And that match had been penciled in for 2020. But obviously, we all know what happened in 2020. Obviously, COVID hit and the fixture got postponed. Michael Nicholson's been back in touch with Fraserburgh FC over the last few months, and a date has been set for Saturday, the 1st of July. Celtic will be heading back up to Fraserburgh to play a benefit match, which will have all the proceeds will go to the local lifeboat in Fraserburgh, which is, obviously needs support and is all funded by donations. So all things being equal, it should be the very first match that the new manager will take the helm back in my hometown, with about a 3,000 capacity and a cash only ticket situation. So yeah, 3, it will be. Well, so I looked up because look, this has got one stand which holds about 400 people, and the rest is just, grassy banks round the side. I've watched my first paid football matches there for, I don't know, about £1 30 odd years ago, probably longer, scarily. And yeah, look, apparently their capacity, record capacity is 3,000. Record attendance 5,800, or officially on Wikipedia. However, all the reports of this game that Celtic played, 6,500 or 7,000 people turned up. So I'm not sure exactly what's going on, but it raised £2,000 back in 1970, and all that went to the families of those lost at sea. So yeah, it's obviously close to my heart, obviously being my hometown, but it's a really good gesture for Celtic to be going back there. And actually the fixture was pulled forward, I'm led to believe, from local guys I kind of still know that are on the committee of Fraserburgh FC, because the fixture was originally supposed to be closer to the Japan trip, but that would have meant a lot of the first team not being involved at all. So the rumour has it there'll be a few more first team players, but I would suggest that maybe the 1st of July might be the very first day of reporting back following holidays. So it might still be a bit of a hybrid squad, but it'll be the first time the new manager will get to do some kind of match.
I would assume it will be the ones that are not currently on international duty. So yeah, probably not Callum McGregor, players like that. Yeah. But yeah, should be good. That's great, man. It's great news. I didn't know anything about it until you mentioned it today. So that's looking like our first glimpse of Celtic in pre-season. So definitely looking forward to that. And as some of the guys in the comments are saying, it's a great photo and a great story. So thanks for sharing that, Paul. What we've also got here, so what we'll do is we'll start rounding up. So Andrew Galea is saying then, come on then, who's your man? So what we'll do is we'll circle back to put a bow to a ribbon on our conversation about who we think should be the man from the candidates. I guess from the candidates we've discussed. But if you really want to drop a wild one in at this point, feel free, Anthony.
So who we think, or who
you want,
who I want,
not who you think, who you want.
Oh, I'd like a Graham Potter. You know, if all being well and equal, yes. But I think realistically, it's going to be Brendan Rodgers, and just because he's available, and Celtic generally have a track record of playing it a bit safe, and I think that's who we'll end up with. And I'm okay with that, and I think he'll do a good job. But yeah, I think by this time next week, he will be the new Celtic manager.
Interesting. Tommy, who do you want?
Well, quite clearly, I would prefer Graham Potter in terms of the people that be mentioned, unless someone comes from left field. The main thing I hope it is it's someone that we're gutted about losing in 2 years when he trots off to the Premier League. But I think it will, at this stage on everything, the fact that Celtic CEO and CFO have flown out to see Brendan in Spain, and the fact that he recently bought a house, £3 million house in Bothwell for his family to live in, I think it might be Brendan. And I would be like Anthony, I'd be comfortable with that.
Yeah. Paul?
Yeah, I agree pretty much with what the guys have said, as we've touched on. I think I prefer Potter because it's something different and it's a forward step. But I think it's leaning heavily towards Rodgers. And if we take a lot of the emotion out of it, which is mostly what's driving if we're being honest, it's the emotion of what happened last time that's driving the lack of wanting him as a candidate. I think, you get him in, support him with cash, and he stays for 2 years. He probably does the job, and then we hand it over to somebody else. So yeah, I think it'll be Rodgers, and I've sort of made my peace with it that it would be a reasonably good appointment. Look, I'd prefer Potter. Of the names listed, let's get Pep. He's done everything he can at City now. But if we're staying in the realms of reality, then I've touched on why I don't think Potter's realistic, because I think he thinks he's got an EPL job coming up. But of the ones that are listed that are actually, on that betting list, I would have gone for him. But as we say, unless there's a candidate out there that's coming out of nowhere like Ange did, and I don't think there is, then yeah, I think Rodgers is the best on that list, unfortunately.
There was some interesting comments around who people thought should be the next manager. Michael Ross saying Gallardo, ex-River Plate manager, or is that too left field? I'm not even sure who he's referring to, so it must be quite left field.
Well, I touched on him very briefly last week, but yeah, Argentina. He had a great record at River Plate in Argentina for a good number of years, so. He's been mentioned a bit, but he's never really made the list. So I assume that we're not looking there.
Yeah, I agreed. Andrew Galea, Muscat is a real option. I tend to agree. Robert Gibson, Muscat is a thug. Nope, no thanks. I think he's okay, but seems to be very divisive, and not in the same ways that Brendan Rodgers is divisive, but also divisive. Michael Ross, just for a laugh, Zlatan Ibrahimovic, no thanks. File under John Barnes. Patrick McLaughlin, I quite like the Canada manager. Probably the same thing, no, too far left field. Yep, probably. And Michael Ross's comment here, what about Dick Campbell? He's done pretty well for Arbroath, and he's certainly going to be the most experienced candidate out there, right?
Dick Campbell's a good laugh as well. He coached me as a kid.
Can he bring his bonnet and the Arbroath TV commentator with him, please?
Oh, GZ Peeps. Yeah.
Well, he's
there's
ever
a vacancy,
seen that on
right?
Twitter? Like the Arbroath TV, it's hilarious.
Yeah. But Tom Boyd's gone now, right? So there's a vacancy.
There's a vacancy.
Let's get the guy in. And Andy
Apparently
Walker's
Peter
left
Grant's got it, though. Peter Grant
got it. Well, the Arbroath guy's probably off to Sky Sports to replace Andy Walker. Who's also at a job now. And Chris Sutton's got to Sky as well, hasn't he?
Yeah,
I think
Chris Sutton's replacing Andy Walker. I think that's
is he replacing him?
Straight swap, yeah.
I think so.
That was an interesting the way the order of that news broke. It was Chris Sutton was announced and then Andy Walker was gone. Interesting. My personal, so look, obviously Graham Potter's great, but is a great candidate. But my feeling about, he's maybe a little bit, he would be gone very quickly. despite being a project manager, and I don't think it would put us in a good position for short-term success. Obviously, Brendan Rodgers is the best CV. He's a known entity. Enzo Maresca, Paul, you kind of touched on, he's got a high ceiling, but my concern, he's also got a really low floor, as in it could go amazing, but it could also completely tank, which is, we've seen that whole range from these kind of feted assistants in the past. For me, from that list, the name I would pick out would be Daniel Farke. I know he didn't do so well in the EPL, but that kind of reckless abandon of football would ensure domestic dominance in my eyes. I don't think he'd do so well in Europe for us, but I'd like him. I think he'd be entertaining, and I think we would hammer some other Scottish teams. But anyway, that's just my thoughts. I agree with you guys. It does seem like it's going to be Rodgers. And one last final shout, Lord Flashheart, get Rafa Benitez in. That recurring joke that Rafa Benitez CV is in Peter Lawwell's desk. So, interesting one. So, we'll just wind up now. Anthony, any final thoughts at all before we wind up?
The Ashes starts this week. So, if you want to see England getting pumped at their own game, get on board. I certainly will be. A few late nights doing that. And if you're in Australia, particularly in WA, and you haven't had your flu shot or your COVID booster yet, please get it, because emergency rooms are being rammed with cases of respiratory illness, and it's a real problem at the moment. So that's my public health message for tonight.
And you have no financial interest in people's whether they get flu shots or not. Just other pharmacists are available. Tommy, any thoughts?
Not running my own business, Sean, so I'll keep it pretty simple. I do have just a single music single to share for people. After last week, there's a band from the Mornington Peninsula in Victoria called Teenage Dads. There's a song called Hey Diego. It came out a few months ago. Changed Diego for Kyogo, and you got Kyogo's song for next season.
Yes, I hope the young striker stays and scores some Champions League goals. Second crack at the whip. Paul, final thoughts?
Yeah, just a usual music reference for me. I'm going back a few months to, I think, a January or February release, which I was listening to back then, but I've been revisiting, which is, I think, the 8th album by the band We Are Scientists. These guys came through in the mid-2000s. Yeah, 8th album. So the debut album is absolutely brilliant.
I remember it.
With Love and Squalor in 2005. So if you've not heard that, go back and visit that. But their 8th album, Lobes, Lobes, came out, I think, in January or February, which is a kind of poppier synth version of their indie rock, but well worth a listen. 35-40-minute album. So yeah, knock that one out in your lunch break.
Can't believe they're still going. I remember seeing them at Tea in the Park way back, man. They were pretty good.
Cracking band. Really good band.
Yeah, with Love and Squalor, really good. Yeah. As usual, to finish the show, just a reminder, can you please like the show, this specific episode, as well as subscribing to the podcast so that alerts would be even better. We have various social media feeds, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube and Twitter. So if you could give us a follow on any of those, I'll try and find that Forest article about Brendan Rodgers, which is really good, and see if I can share that as well. But other than that, hopefully, as we had a comment about it, Andrew Glea, hope we find out by Wednesday show, maybe even tomorrow, sooner the better. So hopefully we've got some white smoke coming out the chimney at Celtic Park soon enough. Other than that, good show tonight, guys. Good chat. Hopefully we've had some sort of sensical comments and hopefully Peter Lawwell is listening. Take it easy, guys. Listen to Tuesday and Wednesday show, and I'll see you all next week. Hail, hail.
Hail, hail.
Hail, hail.